Beethoven Symphony No. 5, Part 2. In the first part of this video, I did some analysis of the first 5 bars of Beethoven's Fifth. The point of this second part to the video is to look at how we can transfer the thinking, the analysis into the practice of baton wielding. So, let's get straight on, bar 1. Actually, however, before we conduct bar 1, we need to know something about the whole of this movement. Beethoven writes the vast majority of this movement in very straightforward 4-bar phrases. There are exceptions. There's a very important 5-bar phrase at one point which the conductor really needs to know about, but leaving that aside, the vast majority of the movement is in 4-bar phrases. Look with me, if you will, please, at bar 110. From bar 110 we can see those 4-bar phrases very easily. We have 110 to 113, 114 to 117, 118 to 121 and 122 to, if we are taking the repeat, bar 1. So you can see from that very clearly, and of course one hears it as well, that bar 1 is not the beginning of a musical phrase, but it is the end of one, the 4th bar of a 4-bar phrase. As an aside, by the way, a useful first rehearsal tip, especially with an orchestra which perhaps doesn't know the music very well or hasn't played it for a long time, is to start at bar 25. From bar 25 you can run through, there are no pauses until you get to the repeat, and then comes the first pause. It's a good way to get into the music. Anyway, thinking of it in the 4-bar phrases, imagine that Beethoven had actually written the music in 4, perhaps in 4/2. If that were to have been the case, then we might think of beginning it like this: 3, 4, ba 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 1. Certainly that is useful in the thinking process, because the 4-bar phrases do need conveying some of the time to the orchestra. Of course, Beethoven didn't write it in 4, he wrote it in 1, so for that reason a real 3/4 seems a little bit strange to me. The other reason I don't like the 3/4, well, it's the 3. The 3 takes us away from the body, and this music is, for me, one of the best examples of music which needs to be close in. It's dense music, it's music that's close into the body. So I, rather than doing 3/4, might think of it as being something like this: 3/4, so it's much closer here, more rather like a 1/2 in fact. So I would think 3/4, ba 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 pa. Okay, now that's a relatively straightforward thought process. What is a little more tricky is what we do with the pause itself. There are 2 parts to the pause. There is the pause itself and what happens after the pause. The pause itself I looked at in the first part of this video and identified that it shouldn't be too long. I'm not going to rerun that discussion now. The more tricky thing, however, is what do we do at the end of the pause? We have 3 options. The first is that the end of the pause coincides with the beginning of bar 3. The second is that there is a gap between the end of bar 2, the end of the pause, and bar 3, of a specific length, 1 bar, let's say. And the final possibility is that there is a gap, but it is of a non-specific, non-determinate length. Let's look at each of those 3 possibilities in turn. So here we are looking at the possibility of there being no gap after that first pause in bar 2. So we have our 3/4, pa 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 pa, pa 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 pa. The second possibility is that we have a gap of 1 bar, for which we really need to use our left hand. So we would have something like this: 3/4, pa 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 pa, pa 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 pa. So the left hand takes us off, and then we get another beat for the beginning of bar 3. The third possibility is that there is an indeterminate gap between the two bars. That might be something like this. 3, 4, ba 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 pa, ba 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 pa. So there we simply wait as we bring off the end of the pause with the left hand. We simply just wait a little longer before we go for the next bar. Now, that question about how you end the first pause is of course replicated in the question of how you end the second pause. As I said, I think in the first video, there are 9 possible combinations of no pause, no gap, determinate gap and indeterminate gap. I'm not going to go through those all here at all. Here's one possibility, which is to give no gap between the second and third bars and between the fourth and fifth bars. So we have 3, 4, ba 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 pa, pa 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 pa, pa 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 pa. Another possibility would be to do a 1-bar gap, a determinate length gap, after both pauses. So we would have something like this. Pa 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 pa, pa 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 pa, da 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 da. There are of course all the other options, and you are welcome to try those should you wish. My recommendation would, however, be that in order to prevent, I nearly said to provide, in order to prevent confusion in your own head and in the minds of the orchestra and then the audience, whatever you choose for these first 2 pauses, I would suggest you do throughout the entirety of the movement.